We are back in the Leadership Launchpad Project. Susan, how are you?
I am in shock. I can't believe I'm looking at a snowstorm outside my window right now. It's freaking April. What is happening here? Other
Yeah,
than that, I'm just great. How about you?
yeah, it's April. We're actually pretty decently warm out here in Edmonton, so it hasn't been too bad. Yeah, we've been rolling full steam, so that's how the game goes, right?
That's it. We got to stay warm on the inside over here. That's what we're focused on today. We are warm inside. We're so fired up. We're rolling out all this programming this week, right, with our teams and doing all these deep dives. And it might be cold outside, but the energy's hot in the locker room.
So, as always, we start with a quote on this show. And
Mm-hmm.
I got one from another Buddhist teacher, and he says, people suffer because they are caught in their views. As soon as we release those views, we are free and we don't suffer anymore. And the Buddhists teach this lesson about non-attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's really all about is it's about letting go of not only things that are happening, but your views about those things that are happening. And that
Mm-hmm.
is an incredible tip. It's harder, it's easier to say than it is to do, but it's an incredible tip for folks out there is in this moment, you're either fighting what is happening or you've accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
And really, a lot of things are neither good nor bad unless we take a slanted view at them. And
Mm-hmm.
so choose wisely. And by choosing wisely, you'll choose how you feel and you'll choose your future.
Mm-hmm. That's why we say mindset is everything, right? Because, yeah, most people don't realize that their perspective is a choice. Their perspective on the suffering can be a choice, right? And it's a choice that they ultimately are in control of. And how empowering is that for somebody who is stuck in the mud, right? Emotionally or psychologically.
And that is the one of the hardest things, right? Is the folks who suffer, and I've been there, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
you really your perspective closes and it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to see the other side of it or a different side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can learn to open up that perspective and change the perspective that you have or choose it to be the one that supports you the best, then
Mm-hmm.
it obviously changes how you feel and then changes how you behave in that moment. And so that's where we're
Mm-hmm.
going today. So, Susan, we got some new research we want to cover today. And so the first one I want to start off with is, we've been hearing a lot of folks, they're heading back to the office and their energy levels, their mood, all these things are kind of up and jumbled. And I got some research out here. And so the first one says 92% of C-level leaders admit their company will not meet their 2022 goals if quit rates and hiring challenges continue. The second or the flip side to this one is half of the employees who quit their job in 2021 quit for mental health reasons.
Wow. Let that hang. Half? Wow. 50%, y'all.
And to go along with that survey, this is from HR Digest, 84% of those employees reported at least one workplace factor that negatively impacted their mental health. And so if we string this story together, is the burnout, the stress, the anxiety, and sometimes, depression that goes with some of these are contributing to people quitting their jobs or underperforming at their jobs, and then ultimately companies missing their 2022 goals. What are you seeing out there in the trenches?
Well, it's funny you ask, because this is something that I've been calibrating all week with my clients. A lot of my clients are leading the charge in terms of transitioning some of their people back to the office. And so, yeah, I've been calibrating a lot of overwhelmed emotions, right? I've been calibrating, the fact that I don't think a lot of these leaders were anticipating just what that transition was going to mean for people's mental health, right? I don't think a lot of us are aware of the difference, right? In terms of what we've been doing here in sort of this 2D experience, right? On the Zoom screen for the last 2 years. In contrast to being in a room full of people, right? HD, 3D, full surround sound. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that I just think that's so fascinating to me, right? Is like that leaders still would not be anticipating that, which tells us what?
It's a lack of understanding. And it's also like, it's not always our fault, right? And like, we went to a comedy show last week, and it was the first time we've basically done any, I suppose, major event in at least a few months, and it felt weird.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing, is like, you're not expecting, like 2 years ago, we used to go, I don't know, a few times a year, and it wasn't a big deal. But then I suppose the last 2 years has really changed how you feel. And you're like, should we be wearing masks? Should we not? Like, there's people sitting in the table next to us. Like, is this safe? Is it not safe? And it like,
Bingo.
just because of the way our mindset and our beliefs have shifted, or our perspective shifted, it's changed our experience from something that was pretty normal, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing too, right? Is the fact that we kind of lost touch with how intense that experience can be, right? Being out in public. I also think, based on what you just said, there's an undercurrent of uncertainty that's running through all of our subconscious minds, right? You said safety. Is this safe? Like, we don't have masks on now. Is this safe? I mean, we've been talking about that as a theme throughout the last 2 years of the disruption, right? Is that uncertainty is what triggers the amygdala into that fight or flight response. So that's stressful. That's stressful. So let's talk about some tips that we have for our leaders if they find that they are really resonating with this, right? If they're noticing either in themselves or in their people, on their teams, if they're noticing that people look super duper overwhelmed. This is something that we are huge proponents of and advocates for. It always starts with self-awareness, right, buddy? Self-awareness is the conduit. That's the entry point, right? In terms of being able to actually get behind those gates and be able to regulate that stress response, right? Be able to actually show up in self-supportive ways in terms of this perspective thing that we're riffing on. How about you? What are some of those tips that you would like to throw out to our peeps?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, when we talk about self-awareness, it's incredibly important. And emotional awareness is also incredibly important. And a lot of folks out there, and a lot of my leaders, we're still working on that aspect. And it's not anyone's fault. That's the first thing, right? Some of us as children, our parents were not emotional people. And so we didn't develop the skill set of not only feeling and understanding what we're feeling, but also processing the feeling instead of just shutting it out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of research that's out there about processing feelings and basically letting them out of your body instead of storing them, and the impact on stress and how you feel, and, you know, even physical health that, you know, we can talk about. The other thing is I saw this book called Insight, and it's the subtitle is Why We're Not as Self-Aware as We Think, and how seeing ourselves clearly help us succeed at work and in life. And it's by Dr. Tasha Eurich. And she's done a lot of research around self-awareness. And similar to driving and similar to intelligence, everybody thinks they're self-aware. So in her research, 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% truly are. And, you know, it's the driving thing. Everyone thinks they're above average driver. Everyone thinks they're smarter than average. And yet average is basically average for a reason. And so she goes on to say that there's two types of self-awareness. There's internal self-awareness, which is an inward understanding of your values, passions, and aspirations. And there's external self-awareness, which is about understanding yourself from the outside in. So knowing how other people see you. There can be a disconnect between external and internal self-awareness. Her research shows there's no actual correlation between people who are externally or internally self-aware. They're just basically two different data points that you need to understand in yourself.
And we would say that with our crowd of high achievers, right, that probably leans more in the second category than the first, right? Because they, for maladaptive reasons, are hyper calibrating how other people are perceiving them, right? It's like, that's the maladaptive supercompensation strategy for safety in the psyche of, or the mindset of a high achiever, right? And boy, oh boy, does that eat up a lot of energy. Boy, oh boy, does that contribute to the burnout.
And that's the other side of it, right? Is as we increase our emotional awareness and our internal self-awareness, we're going to find areas in our life that we need to pivot and change. And that's okay. And it may be stressful in the moment today to do that, but in the long run, it's going to de-stress you and feel much, much better. And the other side of it that I just want to mention, so I was looking at CAMH. So they have some data around, obviously, mental health in Canada, and it kind of flows off of what we were talking about at the beginning. But Canada's mental health is costing the economy about $50 billion per year. And for the stress affects 72% of employees, and those employees want their employers to help them. And 500,000 workers stay away from their jobs each week due to mental health reasons. So these are incredibly high, but also what they've mentioned is that if employers have mental health programs and they promote the culture of mental health and illness prevention, there is a positive return on investment on those programs. So less people are taking disability, less people are on stress leave, less people are missing days of work or are showing up but not actually doing anything, which is presenteeism. But these programs can be vastly helpful as upstream of people who develop clinical issues.
Yeah, I think this is the upstream strategy, right? In terms of how you protect the sustainability of, your mission, of your team. That's everything that we are screaming from the rooftops right now, right? Is like, it is 10 times harder, folks, to deal with these situations once that brick wall occurs. And so I think that this is massively game-changing opportunity. The stats bear it out. This is real. I don't know how we could expect it not to be, especially coming off of the last 2 years, which have been traumatic. Let's be honest. We have all been through trauma, and no, we are not recovered yet from this. And so once you add a little bit of that extra pressure, right, into the nervous system, into that concoction of adrenaline and cortisol and everything that's been naturally just accruing in our bodies over the last 2 years, it's the rain barrel effect, right? It's enough for that to be a tipping point. But inversely, it can obviously be a competitive advantage. It just depends on the level of awareness that leader driving those decisions about how to support their people or not support their people in this way is concerned. So,
Absolutely. Like we've seen it, right? So even at the beginning, 92% of companies are going to miss their 2022 goals, and a large percentage, at least 50% of that turnover is mental health, right? And for folks, mental health is an incredible risk to your business. It's the risk of turnover, where you're spending anywhere from 30 to 400% of someone's salary to replace them. It's a risk in terms of reputation. How are people going to feel when the people who are leaving are writing on Glassdoor?
Glassdoor. I remember Mike Zanny saying that.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there was a study out of MIT Sloan, and it's been really popular lately. And we talked about it, I think, in November, where it said toxic company culture is 10 times more likely for people to leave than compensation.
Wow.
And they got that result by analyzing over 34 million Glassdoor reviews. And so how does that feel if someone leaves and is like, the boss, my mental health was horrible, the toxic culture was bad, like all these things, right? Like you can't afford that as a business. And even what we've seen with better.com, which is your customers aren't going to put up with that either.
No, because it's a violation to like their basic human rights, right? I mean, that is not going to be good for business reputationally.
So we got to move that, right? Folks, you have to think about your people's mental health. You have to be checking in as a leader. You have to open space and hear them and see them and be with them. And then you have to also understand the increased demands of either returning to the office, the uncertainty of going back and forth and changing, and all of those stresses in life. And even, outside of work, where children are heading back to school or they're not, or they're this or they're that, or the gym's open or not, or like there's so much in the air that we need to just be aware as leaders and really keep our ear to the pulse of our people out there.
Yeah, awareness comes before intelligence, folks. You can't solve what you don't first acknowledge. And I know it can be painful if this is not something that you're accustomed to doing, but please contrast that with the pain of everything that you just described. Like, these people, I know we talked to one of our leaders who said she was seeing over 53% attrition in the last 6 months. And so if you're one of those businesses, right, that's experiencing such high levels of attrition and the people are walking out the door, you don't have any choice but to be aware right now. I mean, yes, it's going to be painful for you to have to make changes in terms of what you're prioritizing, from a people resources perspective. but it's short-term pain for that long-term gain. If you want to stay in this game, you gotta just embrace it like us athletes do in the gym, right?
And the game has changed. And that's where a lot of the studies around Gen Z and what they're looking for, and even what millennials, we, and, other folks are looking for in this time now, and how the pandemic has changed what we're looking for. Support on mental health, support and a larger mission, and companies that are caring about their community and living their values has drastically changed. And so as an employer, instituting programs on burnout, on mental health, on helping people see what their values are and live in those ways, and, be leaders in their communities, and all the 2.0 leadership strategies we talk about on this show is more important than ever for your future as a business.
The game has changed, and therefore so has the playbook, folks, especially for our leaders, because at the end of the day, it's our leaders who have to have that awareness the most, right? I mean, they're the ones that are going to be able to make those critical decisions in terms of how they're going to be able to adapt, to this new playbook of strategies.
Absolutely. So moving on, Susan, I wanted to bring in another piece of research that I've been reading about, and this is about bullying.
Ooh, I didn't see that coming.
Absolutely. And so this one is basically saying that even though we've moved to remote work, bullying is on the rise. And so the Workplace Bullying Institute said that 30% of U.S. workers reported being bullied, up from 19% in 2017. And to go from another study out of the UK, a 2021 survey found that only half of British workers felt their organization took complaints about bullying or abusive behavior seriously.
Oh boy.
The last point that they make in that article is that 52% of those surveyed said that the bullying only stopped when the target, not the perpetrator, left the job or was fired. So we don't talk enough about workplace bullying. It's a problem, and I know, Susan, you and I know, because I joke that we're all just hurt children in big bodies all the time. And so that playground mentality about bullying sticks with us. And as leaders, the issue is literally that last line, is we're not taking it seriously, and we're punishing the person who's getting bullied, not the bullier. And for me, the bullying and the DEI kind of fall in similar aspects, like inclusion, psychological safety, trust, equity. They're all along the same lines. And a lot of it starts with our feelings about ourselves and our beliefs about ourselves, as well as, having the ability for folks to truly talk to either their manager or HR or the execs about, like, hey, this person's bullying me. We need to do something about it. What are your thoughts on those numbers?
I can't even believe it. I'm still processing all of those stats that you just rhymed off. It's hard for me to imagine, given everything that we just riffed on, right? That would be the case. Like you would hope that people would be more aware than ever in regards to that type of situation and how corrosive that can be for a culture. You and I, we've been in a lot of locker rooms, and you know what happens in a locker room where there's a bully. I mean, there's a ripple effect to that, folks. Like, that absolutely is not only going to affect the quality of those people's experience, that their health, their everything else, but definitely their performance. How could that not show up on the ice? Right? We would say that's like having a cancer in the locker room.
Yeah, it absolutely does show up, right? And the things that leaders need to be aware of is sometimes the bully is a leader or is an executive or is a boss, right? And they're bullying their employees. The other side of it is sometimes their quote, star performer is a bully. Hey, I'm better than you, whatever. And some of it is sort of coached as a joke, but lands in the experience of the folks as bullying or as like, you're attacking me. And these are, if you don't deal with that as a leader, you don't understand the impacts that's having on people. I mean, one is they're out the door. The other side of it is even if they stay, their performance is going to suffer and their mental health is going to suffer. So it kind of all goes hand in hand for me. It's obviously inappropriate and we want to deal with it, but it is a shocking result that I just wanted to share with folks out there, that just because we're in the workplace doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
And I just think let's also add to that the fact that, when we're talking about the stress response, we're talking about fight or flight, right? So I get it because I know what goes on behind the gates of a bully. I understand that's like projected pain, right? You're projecting that pain onto somebody else because you have an unexamined experience, lacking the internal self-awareness. But yeah, I think that obviously that's extremely reckless and it's extremely irresponsible given the context of everything that we have described today.
So let's close on a good news story.
I love it.
So there was a new article out by Amy Edmondson, and obviously she's one of the leaders in psychological safety research. And she did some new research with 62 drug development companies 62 teams at large pharmaceutical firms. And so what they were trying to measure was, how does psychological safety, diversity, and team performance, how do all of those three factors fit together? And it's something that is pretty obvious, and we've talked about it on this show before, right? Is diversity, because of the different ideas in the room, increases performance. However, if you don't have psychological safety, you do not get those ideas. And so there is a strong correlation between teams with high diversity and high psychological safety. Their performance is better. There's also an inverse correlation that says if you do not have high psychological safety, you actually, even if you have high diversity, your team performance is worse. So the line is actually negatively correlated. So if you have a high fear culture, just get a team of the same people.
Yeah. Well, this is what really makes the case in terms of why the awareness is so important, right? Because if you don't have this safety as the ground floor for everybody else, it can make all those other efforts that you're placing kind of fall apart and go to waste, right? And I think that's kind of goes against the grain of where we need our leaders to be. We need them to be in the position of seeing just how game changer and beneficial things like diversity, equity, and inclusion can be for their teams, for their locker room. So I think that's why we're saying it all starts with awareness, right? We got to make sure, if we're listening to this right now, that we're really priming our folks to turn those lights on full blast and take a really honest look at, right, the psychological safety that's going on right now, especially as they return to work, because I feel like that is where being back in the office is going to be an advantage for these leaders, right? Is they're going to be able to get a much stronger and quicker read on that, right? They're going to be able to calibrate that because they're going to have all those people in the room and they're going to be able to see them interacting, right? And that, like we said, having all of that additional input, it can be overwhelming, but it obviously can also be advantageous from an awareness standpoint.
Absolutely. And it's like we always talk about it, like the foundation for me. I mean, obviously there's the foundation of self, but the foundation in team performance for me is always trust and psychological safety. And once we have those two things, that's what unlocks the power of diversity and inclusion and equity and all these things. And the research backs that up, but it just logically follows, right? And so that's where I want just people to land here today is like, it starts with self-awareness. It starts with your foundation of self. Like, what are your beliefs? How are you showing up? What are you aware of in terms of internally how you're feeling, and then also your people out there, and then unlocking all of that with psych safety and trust. And these things, you know, we can measure all of them, we can coach all of them, we have programs on all of them, but it's really like, get out there and understand what's going on for your people, because ultimately they're the ones who drive your business.
And light strokes, if this is like something that you realize like you might be new to, right? Or this might feel kind of overwhelming because you realize, man, this is not something that I've really been prioritizing up until this point. Light strokes, all you got to do is really just lean in with that intentionality to want to know, to want to understand where your people are at. And just even that, right, creates that safety for your people. They're going to feel seen. They're going to feel cared for, you know? And I just think it's, as we're talking about what our leaders can do, right, in support of making this transition successfully back to the office, I think that's where we want to really leave our folks and land our folks, right, is just turn those lights of self-awareness on, folks. Be super duper intentional and get out there and start having conversations with your people in regards to how they feel about this transition, right? And you don't need to pretend like you got it all figured out and you know everything about how you're going to solve this problem. Awareness comes before intelligence. And you're going to be shocked when you see the intelligence just naturally will reveal itself based on that awareness, right? And that awareness is what calibrates and then gathers the intel in regards to strategically where it is that you might need to really lean in regards to mental health, psych safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of these things.
I love it. It all starts with caring. Susan, obviously for folks out there, if they love the podcast, they should hit subscribe on their favorite podcast platform and share the Leadership Launchpad Project with any leaders in their networks and in their lives. And for all things leadership, psych safety, burnout prevention, speaking, all these things, head on over to elitehighperformance.com to find everything there. Is there anything you want to leave the folks with today?
I do. I actually want to call on our leaders. If this is something that's really hitting the mark in your awareness, okay? If this is something that you feel like, man, this is not the first time I've been listening to Miss Susan and Mr. Rob riff on these things. If you feel like, man, yeah, this is really where we're at right now. You know, people are coming back to the office and we got to rethink this now. And therefore we need to really empower ourselves with a little bit more education in terms of where we start, then I want to invite those leaders out there to jump on a call with us and let us help you explore what the priorities may need to be. Let us empower you, right, in terms of just the abundance of strategies and resources that we have to offer you in support of making that transition successfully with your people.
I love it. And for me, I want to leave everyone with this Audrey Hepburn quote. Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible.
I love it.
Everyone, we really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.